If you are a therapist and you're thinking to yourself, I want to open a private practice, but there's no way, absolutely no way that I could open a private practice, lose my health insurance, lose my salary of my current job, and just do it, this is the video for you, because in this video, we are going to go over how to open a part-time private practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kelly Stevens. I teach therapists how to build thriving private practices. And before we go any further with this video, full disclosure, I have to tell you, this is personally how I built my private practice, so I'm a little bit biased. I opened my first private practice in 2016. I really didn't have tons and tons of savings. I needed health insurance that I was getting from my current job. I needed the salary I was getting from my current job, and there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to quit and just open a practice from scratch with no clients. And so I chose to do it part-time. So I'm a tiny bit biased on this approach. I've also walked through it myself and had over 2,000 therapists in my courses and helped walk them through it. I think this is a great way to go. So right now we are going to go into step one of opening a part-time private practice. Step number one is that you need to consider whether or not you are going to tell your current bosses. Now, I can't tell you what the right way to go on this is. Some bosses are going to be supportive and some bosses aren't. More than likely, if you have a full-time job that is not in a private practice, let's say you work in an agency or a treatment center, more than likely your bosses are going to be supportive of you seeing clients on the evenings or on the weekends. But if you work in a group private practice, like actually I did when I was first starting out, they might not be super keen on you starting a private practice on the side of the group practice you're working in. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is if you're credentialed with different insurance companies and you want to open a cash pay practice outside of their group, that can actually get a little bit tricky for when they're trying to bill insurance companies for you. The second reason is that if you get a referral that calls you and they're in the same geographical kind of area as the group practice that you're working in, the group practice owner is going to have this question in their mind, are you going to like siphon off that client? So you have to decide pretty early on whether or not you can have a conversation with your boss about this. The way I personally decided to handle this was I did approach my bosses and say, you know, I'd like to open my own private practice on the side of this group that I'm working for. However, I'm planning to do it an hour away from where your offices are. Now, the group that I was working for was fully in person at that time. They weren't offering virtual therapy. So that really worked for my bosses and they thought that was a great idea and it was no problem. But before you do anything else, you really need to think to yourself, what kind of conversation you need to have with your boss, and can you stay in your current job, or do you need to consider at maybe an agency or a treatment center where people might not mind as much if you had a side job of opening a private practice? That's step one. Step number two is you need to clarify your why. Now, I know every YouTube video in the world out there says clarify your why, clarify your why, clarify your why, okay? But the reason I'm telling you this is you need to decide, is this part-time private practice that you're dreaming of creating going to eventually be a full-time private practice? Do you want that to be your goal to transition into? Or are you enjoying your full-time job and you just want to supplement your income? Knowing your why you're doing this, why you're going to set it up in the way that you're going to set it up is important, because there are some decisions that you're going to make down the road and you want to have a clear understanding of where you're going and why you're doing it before you open a part-time practice. Step number three is you need to set up proper business foundations. Just because you're opening a private practice, even if you're only seeing one client per week, you are still opening a business and you need to have the right business foundation. You need to decide what kind of company you're going to become. You're probably going to need an EIN number and an NPI number. You're also going to need a business bank account and a business checking account. And although these things sound really complicated, I go over exactly how to set up the business foundation of even a small private practice in my private practice course, which I will link below. You want to make sure that when you're setting up the business foundation of your private practice, that you also get malpractice insurance. Even if you are seeing only one client per week, malpractice insurance is essential. Do not skip it. It also should go without saying, but because this is YouTube and anybody could be watching this, I want you to remember that you also need to make sure that you are licensed in the states you are planning to practice. If you are planning to have a virtual multi-state practice, please make sure that you contact the licensing boards for the states you plan to practice in or where you plan to have clients, and make sure that all their licensing standards are met. Next up, you need to decide on some boundaries for your private practice and the timing of your part-time private practice. Now, when I first started out doing part-time private practice, I decided that it was important that I had at least 2 evenings a week to offer people. It was pretty challenging at first when I only had 1 evening per week, when I would say to people, I only have Thursday nights at 7. The reality is that a lot of people weren't able to fit those times. What I recommend doing, whether you're virtual or in person for therapy, is having at least 2 evenings a week, because you're probably going to see clients after work, right, where you are available. The other thing you want to think about is, do you want to work on the weekend? I know that none of us really want to work on the weekend. I'll be honest and tell you, I kind of hate working on the weekend. But when I first opened my private practice, I saw clients all day on Saturdays. Full disclosure, at that point in time, I didn't have any kids, and now I have 2 wild little dudes, and I don't know if I could do this now, but at that time, I used to see 7 clients back to back on Saturdays before I quit my full-time job. And let me tell you, if it weren't for those 7 appointments a week, I don't know that I would have had the confidence in my practice to take it full-time, because that gave me a substantial chunk of income, a lot of time sitting with clients every single weekend. So it's something to think about. I know that working on the weekend can be a recipe for burnout. I know in a lot of ways it was for me. So if you choose to work a 6-day week rather than just seeing clients 2 evenings a week after work, then what I would suggest doing is that you say to yourself, this is time limited. Until I reach X number of clients and decide to take my practice full time, I'm gonna work Saturdays, but once I reach that goal, I'm not gonna work Saturdays anymore. The next step I want you to make sure to do is that you have a lean, mean, low cost setup. So the key to running a part-time private practice is to keep your expenses low. There are gonna be certain things that you cannot sacrifice on cost. Malpractice insurance is a really great one of those. But you could sublet an office from another therapist. I've heard so many therapists say, like, I want this beautiful office to see all my new clients in. And yes, a beautiful office is important, but when you're first starting out, subletting an office can be a really great idea. There are plenty of therapists out there that don't work evenings and that don't work on Saturdays and would be more than happy to sublet their offices to you, even sometimes by the hour, just to have a little extra income coming in. And this can be a really great way to go. When starting out in private practice, I often recommend to students who are in my online courses, which again, I'll link below, that they start with a hybrid of in-person and virtual sessions. I know that virtual sessions are cheaper to run, right? You don't have to rent an office, but the reality is when you're first starting out, a brick and mortar office can give you some credibility. So I would recommend trying to sublet an office from someone else so that you have a little bit more of that credibility that you might not necessarily be feeling otherwise in a part-time practice. One pro tip here is if you do decide to offer virtual sessions, it is worth it to make sure you are paying for high-speed internet and that you have a really nice background. Now, if you're sitting here in my office right now, this looks pretty nice, right? This is where I sit and I do therapy with clients. If I were to flip the camera around, let's just be honest, you might see a little bit of a mess. I've got books everywhere. I have some of my kids' stuff in here that they dropped off after school. There's a lot, okay? But make sure that your virtual background looks really good, especially when you're just starting out. You want to convey professionalism from the very beginning. The next step you're gonna do is you're going to have to set your fee. Now, I think people are often tempted when they're starting out part-time to not set their fee very high. They just want to kind of get their feet wet and get clients. I would suggest not doing this. I will tell you from personal experience, I have some clients that started out with me in those first early days of me working part-time in my kind of side hustle private practice that stayed with me for a few years. In the beginning, you might have this image of your practice not being really successful, but when it comes to your fee, I want you to set a fee that would be realistic and feel good for you to charge even as your practice grows. It comes back to those feelings of professionalism and making sure that even if if you don't, quote, need the money right now because you have a full-time job, that you are working toward meeting the income goals that you were going to eventually have for your private practice. Other thing you need to make sure to do is you need a system for collecting money, and you need a system for documenting client sessions, producing super bills, and giving your clients everything that they need. I personally use Simple Practice and I love it. I've used it since 2016. I will link below a discount for 2 months free, which will get you started and also will be free when you're first starting out in this part-time kind of situation. But the reason I recommend that you use an electronic health record from the very beginning is that details get lost along the way, and it can be really nice to just have a place to process credit cards and notes that's in kind of like a one-stop shop. So I would use Simple Practice, and I think when you're very first starting out, all you need really is like the most basic model, but it can be a good way to go. While we're talking about electronic health records, you also need to make sure that you have the right paperwork for starting out. Again, this is a place where people like to cut corners. They'll think, I don't know if I really need paperwork starting out. I'm just gonna see one client. You need paperwork starting out, okay? You need to make sure that you have informed consent, notice of privacy practices, a HIPAA policy, all of that. I'll link below to all the documents that you need in order to start a private practice. I have a whole list for you. There's about 12 really essential documents that you absolutely must have when you're starting out that you need clients to sign, and I'll make sure to link them below. Next up, one of the biggest things that you need is a plan for marketing your practice. Now, I know what you're thinking. And you might be saying to me, I'm already going to be spending 2 evenings a week seeing clients. When am I going to be marketing this hypothetical private practice? Here's what I want to tell you. Take it slow. Why don't you just start out by going to lunch or coffee with one other therapist a month? I know you're busy. I know you're working in a full-time job. I know you don't necessarily have time to market your private practice right away, but you probably have time to go to lunch with somebody once a month. This is also a great area where social media can come into play, because social media is something that you can interact with outside of work, right? That you don't necessarily have to meet with someone in order to market yourself. So you might want to consider that. You also are going to need a website. Now, you don't necessarily need the world's fanciest website. I have a free website planning guide that I will also link below, but you do need something and some way for clients to find you. I would also suggest having a Google business listing. That's free and a really easy way to market your private practice. I remember when I was first building my practice on the side of working my full-time job, I went home each night and I just played around with Squarespace, Wix, and some other kind of website builders until I found one that I liked. I ended up using Squarespace in the beginning, and I just built my own website. I had no idea how to do it. Now, I know I'm gonna get comments on this video from people being like, you just built your own website, what do you mean? But so many of these website template builders make it really easy to just build a simple site. I wouldn't make the mistake right away, especially if you're trying to save money, of spending thousands of dollars having someone else build you a site. I personally didn't do that. I'm not sponsored by Squarespace or anything. I don't get any money for ads from them, but that's what I used, and I felt like it was really user-friendly. I have a marketing course that teaches you how to build your own therapist site if you kind of want to do it on a budget, and I will link that below. The one thing I want you to make sure to do from the very beginning is to decide on a niche for your private practice and start just talking to people about your niche and why you are passionate about it. That can go a long way to really starting to become known for who you serve and how you help them. Now, when it comes to building a private practice, there are about 100 other things that I could talk your ear off about, but the most important thing I want you to remember is this. There is going to come a time when your part-time practice is full. I know you might be thinking this now and say, like, Kelly, that's never gonna happen, but it will happen. And there's going to be a point in time where you do have to decide when you are going to jump off. For me, what I decided for my part-time practice was that was going to be when I could afford to pay for my own health insurance from what I was making from my salary. I met with a health insurance broker. They helped me find a plan that was affordable. And when I finally decided, you know what, my practice can afford to pay for my health insurance, that was the moment I decided to jump off and go full-time in practice. But part-time private practice can give you a lot more of that confidence, especially if you're worried about paying for your health insurance, which I know know so many of us are when it comes to leaving a full-time job. I have so many more tools and resources that take a much deeper dive into all of this, but I hope this video just gave you an outline into what steps you need to take in order to open a part-time private practice. I check the comments on these videos all the time and answer questions. So if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.